Okay, today we're going to be looking at different types of nonlinear functions. We're going to be looking at 3 different types. Okay, the first is quadratic. And quadratic happens when you have an x squared. The next is called cubic. And that's when you have an x cubed, or x to the third. And then the third is exponential. That's when you have some number raised to the x power. Okay, now the goal of today's lesson is that you are able to identify each one and determine, based on the graph, which equation it is. Okay, so first we're going to look at the quadratics. Okay, so a quadratic function is y equals x squared. Now that's the basic quadratic function. They can be, have a little more things going on, but they always have an x squared in them. That's what makes them quadratic. Okay, so first, let's look at what a quadratic function looks like and why. Okay, so we're just going to start with a table, just an xy table. Because this is how you graph anything you don't know what it looks like. You pick some values for x, and you plug them in, and then you figure out what y is, and then you can plot those points. Okay, so I'm going to use -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. That'll give me a good idea of what this looks like. So I'm going to take those x values and plug them into the equation. Okay, so since this equation is y equals x squared, all I have to do is square all these to get y. Okay, so -2 squared is +4. -1 squared is +1. 0 squared is 0. 1 squared is 1. And 2 squared is 4. Okay, so now I can plot these points. I have the point -2, 4. So I went -2 up 4. Then I have the point -1, 1. So I went -1, 1. Then I have the point 0, 0. So that's right on the origin. I have the point 1, 1. Oh, right 1 and up 1. And then 2, 4. So right 2 and up 4. So you can see if I connect these, it's definitely nonlinear, first off. But when I connect them, it looks something like this. Alright? So this is what a quadratic function looks like. This is the basic graph for anything that has an x squared. If it's got an x squared, it's a quadratic function, and it looks like this. Okay? Now, it doesn't always have to be in this spot. It could be up here, or it could be pointing down, but it's this basic shape somewhere on this graph. Then it's a quadratic function. Okay, and the next one is a cubic function. Okay, similar to the quadratic, except for this time it's y equals x to the third power. Instead of the second, this is now third. Okay, so we're going to look at it the same way. I'm going to start with a table so that we can see what the graph looks like. Alright, so I'm going to pick some x values just like I did last time. And I'm going to use -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2 again. And I'm going to take all these x's and plug them into the x so I can figure out what y is. Okay, so when I plug in the -2, -2 to the third power is -8, because -2 times -2 times -2 is -8. Then when I plug in -1 to the third power, I get -1. When I plug in the 0, 0 to the third power is still just 0. 1 to the third power is 1. And 2 to the third power is 8. Okay. So you can see this graph is going to look a little different. As I put these points on the graph, -2, -8, so I go back 2 and down 8. There's my point. Then -1, -1, so back 1 and down 1. 0, 0, that's the origin. I have the point 1, 1 there, and the point 2, 8 up here. So you can see this time, as I connect these, that it curves down on one side and it curves up on the other side, whereas a quadratic curved up on both sides, or it could curve down on both sides. A cubic is opposite. It goes down on one side and up on the other side. Okay, so if you see any graph that looks something like this, it's going to be a cubic function. Okay, it could be pointing up on the left and down on the right. Okay, or it could be way over here or up high or down low, doesn't matter where it is. If it looks like this shape, then it's a cubic function, and that means that the equation has an x to the third power. Alright, and the third graph. Exponential functions. Okay, they look like this. They look like y equals 2 to the x power. Okay, but it's not necessarily a 2. It could be any number. But it just, exponential just means that the x is in the exponent. Okay, that the exponent this time isn't a 2 or a 3, it actually is the x. Okay, so we're going to look at this one. Same way we looked at the other ones. We're going to look at a table to see what the graph looks like. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pick some x values, plug them in, find the y values. Okay, so again I'm going to use -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2, and put all of those in where the x is. So if I plug a -2 into the x, 2 to the negative second power, well, 2 to the second power is 4, but since it's negative, that means it's a 1 over 4. Just like we did in IXL the other day. Okay, then if I put a -1 in, 2 to the negative first power, well, 2 to the first power is 2, but since the exponent's negative, it's going to be 1 over 2. And then 0, 2 to the 0 power, if you remember, anything to the 0 power is 1. Okay, so then when I put the 1 in, 2 to the first power is 2, and when I put the 2 in, 2 to the second power is 4. Okay, So now I have my 5 points again. -2 1/4. That means I need to come back 2 and only up a fourth. So here's my point. Then -1 1/2. So I come back 1 and up a half. Then 0 and 1. So that's on the y-axis at 1. Then 1, 2. So over 1 and up 2. And then 2, 4. So over 2 and up 4. Okay. Now, as I connect these, you'll see it just starts going up. Okay. Now, if you remember our talks about exponents, they can't ever equal 0. So this line is just getting closer and closer to the x-axis, never actually crossing it. So it's basically becoming a horizontal line. And then it's going up on one side. That's how you can recognize the exponential functions. Okay? They only shoot up on one side. The other side just stays flat. Okay? But again, it doesn't have to be shaped this way. It could be upside down, or it could be flipped the other direction. Okay? It could be up over here and then going down and flat on the right. Either way, doesn't matter. If it looks like this, then it's an exponential function, and it means that the x is in the exponent. Okay, so now, quick review of all three. And this should be the spot in your notes that you go when you want to quickly check and make sure which graph looks like which shape. Okay, quadratic. Remember, a quadratic is y equals x squared. And this is what we got it looking like. Again, it doesn't matter where it is. If it looks like a U, it's a quadratic. Okay, or it could be facing down. Okay, it doesn't matter whether it's pointing up or pointing down. You can see it's the same basic shape. So it doesn't matter where on the graph. If it looks like this or this, it's quadratic. Okay. Then for the cubic. The cubic, if you remember, is y equals x to the third power, and it looked like this. Okay, it started down and curving and then curved up. So it kind of twisted. Okay, but just like the quadratic could be upside down, this one could be upside down too. So it could actually be up on the left and down on the right. Okay, it doesn't matter which way is up or down. If it's twisting like this or like this, then it's a cubic function, and that means it has an x to the third power in the equation. Okay, now the exponential graph. Remember, it's something like y equals 2 to the x. But again, this 2 could be any number, not just a 2. Okay, but the x is in the exponent. Okay, this is what the graph looked like. Okay, it went up on one side and flat on the other. Okay, or it could be turned around and be up on the left side and flat on the right. But this one has even more, because I could make this one flip over this way, and it could be going down on the right and flat on the left, or it could be going down on the left and flat on the right. Okay? So any of these can be flipped upside down or sideways. It's just these two. If you flip these sideways, you can't really tell. And if you flip these sideways, they just look like the other one down here. Okay? But these, if I flip it sideways or I flip it up and down, so there's actually 4 different ways this one can look. Okay? But it's still the same shape. If you see this shape, it's exponential. If you see this shape, it's cubic. And if you see this shape, it's quadratic. That's the basic idea of what we're talking about. Okay, now it's your turn to try to identify them. I'm going to give you some graphs. You need to copy them down and then determine whether or not they are quadratic, cubic, or exponential. Okay, so here's your 6 graphs. Okay, so looking at these 6 graphs, you need to tell me which type of graph this is. I'll give you a second to do that. Alright, so looking at number 1. Number 1 is just like a U shape. It just happens to be upside down this time. So that looks like a quadratic function. Alright. Number 2, it kind of twists through. It's coming down and then curves and then goes down. So it's up on one side, down on the other side. That's a cubic. So the green one is a cubic function. Now the blue one, it's pointing up on one side and it's flat on the other side. That's what an exponential graph looks like. So the blue one is exponential. Okay, now the purple one, it's also pointing up on one side and flat on the other side. Even though it's pointing a different way than the blue one, it's still up on one and flat on the other. It's still exponential. Okay. Now the yellow one, just trying to trick you a little bit, honestly, with the yellow one, because it's not quadratic, cubic, or exponential. You should recognize this one as a linear function because it's a straight line. Okay, so no, the yellow one is linear. Alright. And then the red one is going up on both sides like a U, so it is quadratic. Just like this orange one was over here. It's pointing down on both sides. This one's pointing up on both sides. These are both quadratic. Okay, so at this point you should be able to identify the nonlinear function from the graph. Okay, now at this point you should also be able to identify the function from the equation. So I'm going to give you 6 equations. You're going to tell me which type of function they are. Alright, so here's your 6 equations. Looking at the equations and looking back at your notes from our graphs, you need to identify which type of function each equation is. I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, so now really the only thing we're doing on these is looking for those pieces. Okay, if I go back to this slide, I'm looking here. Look at what this says. This says that quadratics have an x squared in them. It says that cubics have an x cubed in them. And that exponential have an x in the exponent. Okay, so those are the three things you're looking for to know if it's one of these types of functions. Alright, so looking at number 1, I see that there is an x cubed. Well, that tells me that number 1 is a cubic function. It's as simple as that. If you see an x to the third power, it's cubic. Okay. Now, number 2, as I'm looking at number 2, I don't seem to see any of those three things. In fact, I noticed that this is in y equals mx plus b form. Well, that's because this equation is linear. That's another one of those trick ones. Okay, so but it was linear because it didn't have any of those things from yesterday that cause it to be nonlinear. Alright, now looking at number 3, I noticed that there is an x to the second power. Well, second power means quadratic. So I know that number 3 is quadratic. Okay. Number 4. Again, I notice there's an x squared. Now, it looks a little different from this one. This one had y equals x squared. This one has the x squared in the same size as the y, but that doesn't matter. If there's an x squared, okay, then it's quadratic. Okay, as long as it's being added or subtracted to the y and not multiplied. Okay, but if you see an x squared, then it can't be anything other than quadratic. Okay, now looking at number 5, what do we see here? Well, this time I see the x as an exponent. Well, that tells me that this must be exponential because the variable's in the exponent, so that means that this is an exponential function. Okay, and then looking at number 6, again, this doesn't quite look like a normal equation, but I see an x to the third power, so that means that this equation is for a cubic function. Okay, so it's as easy as that. When you're looking for which type it is from the equation, you're just looking for either an x squared somewhere in it, or you're looking for an x to the third power somewhere in it, or you're looking for the x in the exponent. And that tells you which of the three it is. Okay? So the main idea today, so if you know everything that's on this slide, from the name to the type of equation to what the graph looks like for these three nonlinear functions, then you know what you're supposed to know after today's lesson.